want to spend some time talking about model building with you. I have all my supplies here, or many of my supplies. I have some corrugated cardboard, and you can see the edge is corrugated. That's how we know this is corrugated cardboard. You can use this material for building model this time. This is foam core, and I'm showing you the factory edge of the foam core. It's usually a little bit dinged up, but it's always going to be straight. And foam core is foam on the inside with some paper on the outside. And we can use that for building models. You have to go purchase it though. And so I don't have, you could create a white base this way, or you can use corrugated cardboard. A triangle, in this case, it doesn't matter what kind of triangle it is, if it's a 35 or 30-60 or 45-45. All I need is the right edge. The right angle edge. I have my T-square. You can see the very end of it here. I have my X-Acto knife and a box of blades because I'm going to need to change that, I can guarantee you. I have my glue, my Elmer's glue all. You can use Aleene's tacky glue as well, but those are pretty much the only two glues I recommend. I have my architect scale, pencil, in this case just a 2H, and I have my cork back ruler, my metal straight edge, so I can use it for cutting. I have everything set up on my cutting mat, and I have my cutting mat taped down to the table, and I used my T-square to square up my cutting mat so that I could use it and kind of rely on it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my T-square and bring it onto my cutting mat, and I'm not going to use my T-square for cutting, but I'm going to rest my metal edge, my metal straight edge on the edge of the T-square. And that will give me a nice cutting edge that way. So I can do the same thing with my triangle. When I want to make a 90 degrees, I can take my triangle and I can use my metal straight edge on that, and I can also cut. So these are two ways to get nice straight cuts. You can get 90-degree angles. So I recommend that we always use the factory edge when we start out with any board that we're cutting, if we have one that has factory edge. And I mentioned that earlier, there's that factory edge. And I'm going to rest that factory edge on my T-square straight line here, my horizontal line. We always have a very sharp blade. We always want to have a really sharp blade, and I'll show you in a bit why that is. We always want to cut perpendicular or parallel to ourselves this way. We don't want to cut this way. And the reason is that when we cut parallel to ourselves, meaning we're going in, along the same direction, same plane as our body, you might notice as I go through that my wrist doesn't shift and I can cut without making any changes in my wrist's action. If I decide to cut this way, my wrist has to bend into my body. So what that means is you get crooked lines. So let's see, I'm going to show you how I'm going to cut this foam core. And I have my factory edge here resting up against my T-square. And I'm going to measure with my scale just an inch. I'm just going to cut off an inch here. So our inch marks on our architect scale are over here. And we can use this to measure an inch. And later on we'll learn all about this. So I'm going to make a very light mark, just one. I'm not going to draw the whole line that I need to cut. I'm just going to make one mark over there, one mark over here, and I'm going to use my metal straight edge to cut with. So you can see I'm going to cut, if you watch how I cut, I'm going to cut so that my elbow leads, and when my elbow leads, my wrist stays nice and straight. If I decide, like I said, if I decide to cut this way, then my elbow and my wrist all have to bend in awkward positions, and they shift as they're going along, which means that they are not going to give me a straight cut. So I'm going to keep my fingers as far back away from the metal straight edge as possible. The trick is to never take your eyes off of the cutting tool. So I'm going to push down, and I'm going to run my knife at a 45-degree angle. I'm going to slide my fingers down I slide my hand down. And I'm going to go through one whole cut. And then I'm going to do it again. going to start at that same place. I haven't removed my hand from my metal straight edge. I'm keeping it there. And now you'll probably start to hear this bumpy sound. See how it's going bump, bump, bump? That means my blade is too dull. And when my blade is too dull, it's going to tear the paper. So you can see that really creates some problems. So I'm going to show you you can see the difference here where it's all rough and here it's all smooth. So I'm going to just cut that off. So you can see where my blade started out nice and smooth. It's really nice smooth cut, and then suddenly my blade realized that it was too dull, and then it starts to skip. And that's the kind of look you get when the blade is skipping based on it being too dull. So changing the knife is going to make a huge difference. So I'm going to show you. You just turn the dial, turn the grippy part here, pull the blade out. It's good to have a depository for your blades. If you don't have a box to put your old blades in, then you need to wrap them really carefully in tape before you put them in the trash so that they don't get anybody unexpectedly. You really don't want anybody to get poked by an X-Acto knife. Here's a nice new blade, and we're going to try that cut again, and you'll see what happens, what the difference is between how it cut earlier and how it cuts now. So notice my fingers are staying far away. I'm running the knife parallel to my body. So my wrist and my hand all stay at the same angle all the way through the cut. Notice you can't hear that kind of sound. And you get a nice straight cut. So that really makes a difference to have a sharp blade. So it's really important not to hesitate. So you can see the difference that was earlier. This is now. Really important not to let a dull blade stay on your knife too long. I would say if you're cutting foam core, your blades are likely to go faster. So you want to, maybe every 4 or 5 cuts, you might have to change your foam core. Here's our cardboard. We're going to do the same thing. I want to choose, I don't really have a factory edge here, maybe this, but there doesn't look like there's going to be a great factory edge. You want to experiment with how you cut your cardboard because sometimes, because it's corrugated, it might do funky things. So I like to cut my cardboard across the grain. So you notice the grain goes this way, and I'm going to cut across it. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm keeping my fingers out of the way. I've got my body perpendicular, not perpendicular, parallel. You can see it's a little bit tricky. You're getting that skipping sound, but that's not because the knife is dull. That's because the corrugated cardboard has a corrugation. And so you're hearing the knife cut through the corrugation. And yes, it might take you 2 or 3 times. Do not take your straight edge away. Don't stop looking at what you're cutting. And you should get a nice, well, almost a nice clean cut that way, even though it makes that sort of flippy sound. If you try to cut it with the grain, cutting it along this way, you kind of, depending on where you cut, you're going to get some different action. So it might be a little bit easier to cut. Notice it's still three times, but see it'll go in a different direction, and depending on where you cut, it might be a little bit more smushy. So keep that in mind when you're building your model, that where you cut that cardboard is going to make a difference. So in terms of gluing, I'm going to cut a few pieces here to glue together. You don't use a lot of glue to glue cardboard or to glue foam core. We use a very little bit of glue. So let's trim a piece of this foam core here. And notice again that I'm not cutting towards my body. I'm cutting parallel to my body. And another good reason to run parallel to your body is you're keeping your body out of the way. If you cut perpendicular and move towards your body, there's a good chance you can cut yourself. And like I said, your arm is going to get into an awkward position. So as I'm getting ready to glue, I want to have some glue on a surface that is not, I'm not going to use my bottle to glue things. The tip is great, but it's not for applying glue onto your model building surfaces. You want to be able to control them much more so. So you can use a toothpick or a paper clip, or found a piece of wire here. You could even use the edge of a piece of cardboard. This would be fine too. In fact, that's what I'll do so I can show you. So I'm going to dip that edge into there and get the glue that way, and I'm going to apply the glue pretty evenly, just kind of running it along the edge here. So my glue is very dry. Glue all is nice and unmoist, so it gets really sticky. So I'm putting that much on there, and then I'm going to apply it to my model, my other piece. So I'm going to hold it for a sec, get it lined up, keeping it vertical. I'm going to press down a little bit. And then I'm going to grab my triangle again. And once I think it's kind of stuck, I'm going to find my triangle, and I'm going to use the corner of my triangle to get it to set it at 90 degrees. So that should work pretty well. I want to make sure that my edge is all the way out to the ends. Hold that glue down, let it dry. Don't be in a rush for it to be done. You want it to dry thoroughly. So we'll let that sit for a second. The same thing is true with the foam core. If I'm going to glue the foam core together, and notice that I now have it standing up so that gravity is working with me, right? I don't need to hold anything up. Nothing's going to flop over. Gravity is working directly with me. I'm going to do the same thing with if I try to use the foam core for glue. Foam core, it's the paper that sticks more than the glue does, the outside paper. So I'm going to put my glue on there like I did before. I'm just going to clean off some of that glue. I want to make sure it's nice and even. And I'll use one of the edges of this to make sure there's no glue on that side or that side so that we can have it be really, really easily smooth and straight. So I'm going to attach my two sides together. I can look and see from this angle how close they are. And then I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to put it down here on the cutting mat and give it a little bit of pressure. Then I'm going to flip it so that it's standing upright. And I'm going to use my 45-degree triangle to make sure that I'm in my 90-degree triangle to make sure it's 90 degrees. And then I'm going to let that dry. And notice again, I'm using gravity. I'm letting gravity assist me in this. Now, when you're building your boxes, you might want to keep that in mind, that gravity is a great tool. So when you're ready to add a third piece to your object, to your box, you can add that piece while it's still standing up. But it might be easier, I would recommend, highly recommend, that you add that third piece as your Z axis. So if you think about this as X and Y, and then this is going to be your Z axis. So we'll put that on, we'll use that to stabilize our box. So we're going to put the glue on two edges here. And now your box does not look like these little scraps of foam core that I'm using. So I want to remind you that you're gonna have to cut them to a certain size in order to get them to be that box that you're looking for. But we're just gonna stick those in there. That gives us a nice clean joint. And we're using gravity to help us. So we can use our 90-degree triangle to make sure that that's on there straight. And some pressure. And then rather than leaving it standing upright, I'm going to put it sideways so that it doesn't have to hold itself up.